Tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai ki Whangarei Takiwāhui for Wednesday the 24th of August. Councillor Benny is going to open our meeting with karakia.
Kia ora ti marino, kia whakapapa ponamo ti moana. Hei huarahi ma tātou I te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai. Tātou e a tātou katoa. May peace be widespread. May the sea be like greenstone. A pathway for us all this day. Give love, receive love. Let us show respect for each other.
Kia ora, Councillor Benny. Thank you very much. Councillors, I'll call for any declarations of interest for this, the one item that's on our agenda today. Councillor Hobbs.
Yes, Your Worship, I've got an interest in the case. I have locally recorded please. Interest is I was a member of the original working party and had to withdraw because of one of the current sites and a family member being involved in that site.
Thank you for that explanation. It's unfortunate that you can't take part in the debate. Any other declarations of interest for this item? Councillors, everybody is present, so there's no requirement for apologies. Item 4.1, I'm going to pull rank and, as Mayor, move this item, and it is a very long-winded item, and but I am going to read it out because we do have members who will be joining us virtually, and it is a pretty significant event today. So I'm going to move that Council 1 agrees that there is ongoing risk to the operation of domestic passenger services at Whangarei Airport due to compliance and operational constraints, and notes that Council does not control many of the variables that may negatively impact the future viability of passenger air services. 2, agrees that protecting an alternative site for a possible future airport is the best way to provide certainty for the provision of a domestic airport near Whangarei City. 3, agrees that from the work undertaken to date, Ruatangata Site 9 is the recommended preferred site as the replacement airport, pending further investigation. 4, undertakes further technical investigations to support a notice of requirement designation for the recommended preferred site, Ruatangata Site 9, including A, continued engagement with Iwi Hapu and stakeholders, including Ministry of Transport and Air New Zealand, including reconfiguring the Mana Whenua Advisory Group as recommended within the adopted Consultation and Engagement Strategy 2022. B, undertake a carbon assessment and climate change risk assessment for the project. C, establish a meteorological station at Ruatangata Site 9. D, investigate alternative alignment options for Ruatangata Site 9 for the assessment of effects to be based on. E, identify and commission baseline environmental and cultural monitoring activities, including acoustic and ecological work to inform an assessment of effects. F, progress environmental effect assessment reports and an RMA-focused assessment of alternatives. But wait, there's more. G, develop cost estimates and an implementation program for the above activities and for airport protection and associated infrastructure investment. So that was all part of 4. 5, request staff report back to Council on progress with further technical investigations, including any fatal flaws with Ruatangata Site 9 and the next steps before confirming the proposed site and pursuing a notice of requirement or designation process. 6, negotiate ongoing engagement for the next stage of this project with Becker Consultants for the work outlined in this report. If a satisfactory outcome is not achieved through negotiation, expressions of interests be sought. 7, notes the reporting for the airport location option study to date has been based on desktop analysis of available information and advice from specialists, Mana Whenua and stakeholders, and from community engagement, with the exception of Ruatangata Site 9, where physical site inspections were able to be undertaken and included in the assessment process. 8, notes that there is no current evidence that advances in aircraft technology will overcome the deficiencies of Whangarei Airport. 9, notes that this decision is to protect a location for an alternative airport site so that the community can be confident in long-term access to air travel near Whangarei City. 10. Notes that the decision to move from Whangarei Airport to construct a new airport at this alternative site has not been made, and that currently there is no planned date for this. 11. Notes that there is no perfect location for a new airport located close to Whangarei City. Each of the preferred locations has its own positive and negative attributes. However, no fatal flaws have been raised at this stage for the 3 shortlisted options. And 12. Notes that the funding mechanism for the detailed design and construction of a new airport is yet to be determined. It is expected that funding for the construction of a new airport will require lots of external government or other funding. Do I have a seconder for those motions?
I'll second.
Councillor Innes, Deputy Mayor, is seconding. He was the quickest with his pizza.
Would you just a question? Is that a word that you just added in there?
Yes. No, it was a sidebar.
Okay, thank you.
The recommendations will be as written in the agenda with my little bits of additions. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Innes, for seconding that. Most of what I've gone through with the recommendations explain what it is that the decision that we are making today. We're not deciding to build a new airport. We are coming to the conclusion of a very long process, which actually started back in 2014, which is kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to take the honour of moving this today, because it's at the end of my term as Mayor. This is kind of closes it off as this part of the step in the process. I brought with me today an important tool. This tool, this spade, was the spade that was used on the 30th of December 1963. Most of us were born, many were not, to turn the sod at the Whangarei Airport. And it was gifted by McBreen and Jenkins, who were the contractors at the time. So I thought it was a really fitting item to bring to this meeting today, because we're potentially setting up the turning of a sod at a new airport location a long time probably into the future. But it's nice to bring the past in with us. And of course, Whangarei was not yet a city. It was in the following year, 1964, that we got to the population of 20,000 people and got the honour of being called a Whangarei city. So it's kind of bizarre that 5 times the population now, at 100,000, we're thinking to the future for the next airport location. I want to pay tribute to the people who invested their time into giving us submissions through our locations option study. Sorry, not the study, the proposal, our statement of proposal and consultation. They haven't been forgotten, and again I brought their submissions in today just to remind us that this has been a project that has had great community interest and their feedback is valued. But I also want to acknowledge the work of the working party, the groups who have been working incredibly hard through all of these steps in the process to guide the process. And I'm going to be sort of breaking a little protocol, but at some point when I finish speaking, I would like Councillor Holst to give us his input, his feedback on the working party, and I know that you won't be taking part in the debate and the decision, but it would be good for us to be able to hear that. I think again, in the Appendix A, which is the Whangarei Airport Location Options Study, on page 44 of our agenda, it's actually page 31 of the report, it's important that I highlight at the top of the page, it says, for the avoidance of doubt, the recommendations set out within this report do not pertain to Council committing to construct a new airport, purely to protect sufficient land and airspace as a means of preserving the ability to do so in the future if required. So while it feels like we're making a big decision and saying we're going to build a new airport, we're not today. That we are securing the potential of that site. We're going to do a lot of investigation into its suitability as the preferred site that we have decided if we choose it so today. So as you've heard, there are a tremendous amount of reports yet to be done. And one of the most interesting things will be setting up the meteorological station, so we'll be able to compare the data from the current location for the airport at Whangarei and the proposed new location, and get some evidential basis to be able to make a decision in future. I think that's all I need to be saying at this stage, but I will reserve my right of reply. But I will ask Councillor Holtz just to give us his feedback on the working party. Thank you.
Thank you, Worship. And I must say right from the very start, this is one of the things the work that councillors do, and you know, every now and again we've got to look well into the future and actually be brave to say yes, we're going to go down a process and see what the outcome can be. We all knew that we were under pressure for our airport, so Councillor undertook, well, he's setting up a subcommittee to look into the possibility of seeking a new airport site. I want to congratulate my colleague, Councillor Greg Martin here. Greg and I and Cherry Herman were original councillors on the working party, and it is really good because right from the start we had Tangata Whenua people engaged as well, and that process continued along very, very smoothly. It's quite interesting that we actually found in the original study, we found 29 sites around the district, and it's hard to say that you'd have 29 sites, but that's when first shown up, and through a process guided by our consultant Fraser Campbell, and I thought he did an excellent job holding everything together. Becca, Air New Zealand, and the operators and everyone else who had an input at that stage, that we actually reduced those 29 sites down to preferred 4 sites, which still includes Whangarei. The amount of work in the background, what rules some of the sites out is obviously the angle of the runway, can it fit in, the angle of ascent and descent of planes coming in, very, very complicated. And then you go down to soil types, you know, everything else underneath, so soil conditions, proximity to the people, proximity to other services, but it's quite extensive. So the time rolls on, but as the time rolls on and we got down to the preferred site, you know, we did some really consultation. I just want to praise the council for the way we went through this process. It is a huge process. There's a huge amount of people out in the communities. I know particularly around all the sites that have been really anxious about what we're going to do. But they do want us to make a decision. But to the other ones, there's going to be a lot of relief people today. This motion is quite clear that we're going down to look at it seriously at Site 9 at Ruatamata. So a lot of relief people, but you know, I hope that they understand that council has to do due diligence on all sites and do due diligence without fear. And I think the process allowed it. I think Greg Martin here is Chairman of Infrastructure Group and the people he pulled together, we were able to talk quite openly at our meetings. I thought we had some really, really good debates. I think the process, council has done the right thing by taking time to make sure we got everything right. We went through the consultation, we heard from our residents, and I think that's helped us make the final decision. So I just wish the council luck in what happens in our investigation in the next phase. And I think everyone should be well proud of what we've done. And it's a lot of work that our ratepayers probably don't think we do. And I think I want to emphasise that the council, all the council around this table should be quite satisfied with where we've come to and the recommendation we've got in front of us today. So thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to follow on from Councillor Holtz, to acknowledge the huge and engaging process we've gone through. It's really a question of Chief Executive or expertise. I see that we're looking at future-proofing the district. And a key part of that, of course, is looking at an airport. But I'm mindful that an airport is more than just a runway. And I see that Future-proofing really is looking at zoning around that and looking at commercial and light industrial development, plus also looking at the infrastructure that's provided for the airport. So my question really relates to the investigation, the further investigation. Is it purely related to the runway and the various configurations of that, or is it going to move ahead and just future-proof and look at the future zonings and infrastructure in that area?
The initial reports that we'll do will look really at the airport itself, runway configuration, assessment of effects, and whether aeronautically it meets our requirements. Further on in the process, we will be looking at the types of things that you are mentioning. Airports quite often are an economic hub, and as a result of that, we will look at what else we need to put in place alongside the airport designation that would help support activities of an airport to improve that economic stimulus.
Thank you, Worship. Very good reply. Thanks.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Councillors, open to the debate.
Chair, question.
Question, Councillor.
There's been a lot of discussion amongst the community that possibly this is being rushed and could be held till after the election. What is council's view on that statement?
My response to that would be that, given that this process started in 2014, that it's actually been a very long, slow burn process, and this iteration of council have been through the consultation process, looking at the reports. We collectively, as a group, have the knowledge and the background to be able to make this decision. And also I would encourage people to recognise that the decision is not to move the airport. It is about closing off this part of the process and agreeing that to do further investigation into the preferred site, which is the process that we've all been through. So that would be my response.
And if, as the agenda has stated, that it is about investigating the next phase of it, if it comes back and it finds that Site 9 is not up to standard, what are the next steps from that?
Yeah, I think that's made quite clear that if there are fatal flaws, we've still got the other sites as potential, but yeah. So we won't know that.
And what happens if all 3 sites become fatal flaws as well?
Then it's back to a very long drawing board. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've done a fair bit of homework on this subject, and it's given me great pleasure to have worked alongside with Greg on this. And the history I've found, the first iterations weren't in 2014, they were actually in 1999. So it has not been a rush process, and I think it's more than a drawn out one. I'm very happy that we've got to this point, and now we can get on with the business of ensuring that we're doing the right thing by our future generations. Thank you.
Yeah, so this has been a really interesting process, and I'm not going to comment on the process other than I think there are a number of flaws with it. And I think firstly, the option that we stay at Whangarei being given to the public, where 50% of people voted for that option, was a little bit misleading and has caused some angst among the community who vote for that option, thinking that that was an option. And it may be an option or it may not, but I don't think that was made clear enough. So that was a flaw at the start. One of the next item, and it's not included anywhere in the recommendation, is a lot of the submissions, and a submitter in particular who submitted personally to us on it, talked about the effect on property values for people in that area, and the uncertainty that this has created for them and will create for them into the future. There's huge uncertainty out there, and there's nothing in the recommendations that takes that into account, and I believe it should be taken into account. One of the things that, and we brought it up at a previous, or I brought it up at a previous meeting, is the cost of a new airport, and Councillor Innes has touched on some of the stuff. It's not just building an airport, there's a whole heap of work to do around it. I think there's been a cost thrown around earlier on at 150 to 200 million, and I think we all know that that is nowhere near the cost of what this will be. And for me, that is something that we could have and should have explored further, because that might be the fatal flaw in the whole process. And that we are required, we will be required, obviously, to get government funding for this, and that is going to be way in excess, and that includes infrastructure around the proposed airport site, let alone building the airport itself. So those are things that I just think have not been made as clear as they could have been, and so that creates some uncertainty, I believe, and I think for the residents going into the future, item 10. Item 10 says, notes that the decision to move from Whangarei Airport to construct a new airport at an alternative site has not been made, and that currently there is no planned date for this. That does not have any, the residents out there who live out that way do not have any faith in that decision. They will have that uncertainty with them going into the future. So I think that part of it for the residents has been a flaw in this process, and I understand to a degree why, but I think that there needs to be a lot more work done on that to make, so for instance, will council be assisting with any devaluation of property rates if we decide to put an airport here? I think we all know what that answer is, and that creates a huge amount of uncertainty for people in that area. So I just put that out there. It's been a really interesting, and I think it is a good process in lots of ways, but I think there are some real flaws in it.
Councillor Benny? Councillor Go.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question. Councillor Benny highlighted sort of on the cost of the next stage. Do we have a sort of significant sort of figure on the cost of that, or and is that budgeted or is that unbudgeted? Like, where does that come from?
Within the conclusions in the agenda item, you'll see item 12 there indicates what the estimate was for 2018, 122 million. And it goes on further to say that it's expected to be somewhere in the region of $150+ million. It's an expensive asset. Until further work has been done on this particular project, it's difficult to give you any figure with any real certainty. It will be a large figure, such as what we've just said.
I'm sort of meaning the next step of all the investigation.
That will provide certainty, well, some additional certainty as to where that figure will land.
Councillor Gerline is asking if there's a budget for the next steps.
So that's sort of what I mean, like the next steps and all the bits and pieces that go in that. Like,
we've got funding in the LTP. Yeah. At this point in time, we need to put together exactly the work that needs to be undertaken, and we need to get a cost estimate for that element of work. So that will be done over the next few months.
Any further debate? Councillor Connor?
It's one of these things that it's nobody really wants to kind of speak on, because somebody's going to be upset with us regardless of how this goes. I appreciate the amount of submissions that have been given in to us that we have to use to decide this big decision for the whole district, for Northland, for Te Tatogara. It's something that I've not taken lightly, and I've tried to appreciate as many of the commentaries that I've received through the social medias, and the fact that we haven't made our decision yet until shortly. And I've always tried to make sure that I come in with an open mind to be able to change as well. It's one of those things. With this whole airport decision, the environment is one of the things that's top of my mind, and I appreciate those who have submitted on the stream life, the impact that it will have on bird life and the such that is around these areas. Regardless of where it goes, it will impact these type of things. I appreciate with Site 9, as we have, there are different options that we can get around the stream as well, and I'm really hoping that when the future decision, if it does get to that stage to move it, that option is taken into account and avoids the stream as much as possible. I really hope that the future discussion and decision making on the move, but also just going forward, works really closely with the Iwi Hapu Manawhenua group and neighbours and those that are going to be very affected by this. Hell, I'd love to be able to see the future of air travel be here really quickly, but a lot of people are, as much as we want to be able to move forward, everybody is quite restrictive and doesn't want to explore new things. So it's always quite tricky for some technology to actually move forward at a fast pace, and yet everybody's got a mobile phone almost these days. For this decision, it provides us some certainty and protection for if there is a failing at the Whangarei grandfathered airport. It is one of those things that most of us these days know Whangarei as that's the location where the airport is, but as the spade is here today, there was a decision to bring that into at that stage. I really hope that within this, the supporting infrastructure is taken into account, the roadways, the ability to not impact the local residents as much as possible, and so that actually the infrastructure is brought up to a standard at the same time. Another thing that I am noting that recently Raglan gave back the designation airport that they had down there to the Manawhenua in that area, and that's something that I hope if changes happen to the Whangarei Airport that could happen with us, and however that works. That's another whole process to go through, but I'm looking forward to processes to see that type of thing happen too. Feeling rushed about this thing always is a thing when things get highlighted to us, especially with newspapers being able to headline it right there and it's in our faces. But taking into account that it's been going from 2014, the process is so long with councils and decisions and predictability that our lives are so busy, it's easy to miss the cues and miss where the stages are, which also needs to have that connection with the district as much as the council members can as well. I'm in support of this particular move for the protection of future air transport, but I also take into account that I'm appreciative that it's within here the climate change impact assessment that will be taken, because it will have a huge impact. It will be taken a large area out, the impact of the construction, the concrete, whatever, but also the new floodplain that will be created within the airport that hopefully will be mitigated as much as possible to reduce any runoff into the environment as well. Thank you very much.
That's a cut forth.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just had a question first. Sorry, I thought Councillor Peters was going to go next, and so I'm thinking Molly. I had a question for the Chief Executive. How much has all the current preliminary work cost Council? We've got a...
It's in order of about $1 million. Since 2014, it's around that $1 million.
Thank you. I like the way the recommendations have stepped us and I think the public through the process. I've said before, I think this is the biggest, hardest decision that I've had in the 9 years I've been on council, because whatever you decide, as the recommendation says, there are pros and cons to all the sites. I take on board Councillor Holz's comment that you have to be brave and make decisions for 30 to 50 years out, and I'm reminded when you hold up spades with 1962 written on them that many of us here will not be around. Most of us here, in fact, there's a few young people, I know there's no.
Speak for yourself.
Will probably not be around when a new airport, wherever it might be, will be built. But you do have to make some really big decisions for the future of the district. My personal preference, like many people's, is that we could stay at Whangarei. But I also accept that if we can't, we do need to put a spade in the ground now. And we need to make a decision now, at least in principle and with some steps, to secure a site for the future. So I accept, unwillingly, but I accept what we're doing. I do think there's real difficulties in terms of our location for our region. If you have one on the south side, which is one of the options, is one of the options, you are part of, as Councillor Innes has referred to, sort of an economic hub at Marsden Point, Whangarei Point, all the associated infrastructure is effectively there. I mean, of course, there's still work to be done. The difficulty then is finding a site in that area and the residential development that's happened. But it does at least mean, if we had a site there, it does at least mean that people, if they come into an airport there, have to come through Whangarei to go further into the north. The downside is it's really, really close to the Auckland airport, I guess, so you probably miss quite a lot of tourist travellers who would fly then too high here. But it does have that south side, meaning people have to come through Whangarei. If you go on the north side, which is the preferred option at the moment, you then risk tourists again going straight to Kerikeri because a north side airport is so much closer, I guess, and people bypassing Whangarei because they don't need to come back here. So that I've tried to weigh up those options, and I found it very, very difficult. I keep coming back to, let's hope that in the future with new plane technology we won't need to move from Whangarei. But I also accept, and I was quite interested, I think Fraser pointed it out, I've been busily thinking about battery operated planes and electric planes and how they could just do this.
You just did it.
What did I do? Oh, yeah, I did it again. I did it again.
Need another truckload of coal.
Oh, and I did it again.
Need some more coal than 100.
Is somebody able to please find out what's going on with our lights?
Not enough coal in 100.
It's a sign.
Electricity's just run out.
Some sort of sign.
We could carry on.
Yeah. That electric planes are not necessarily the answer, and in fact you will still need, excuse the irony, but you will still need lengthy runways, etc. So whether Whangarei is an option in the future, which many of us would prefer, you still need to future-proof in case it's not. A couple of things that I've been and I remain concerned about. One of them is that we are quite beholden to Air New Zealand because Air New Zealand have the monopoly, and Air New Zealand decide that they're going to fly 60 and 70 seat planes in and they need runways of some length, then ratepayers effectively and taxpayers are beholden to that company's decision, and I find that I struggle with that, I guess. It may be the reality, but it's a reality for now, and maybe it will change in the future. But we are very much having to make this decision because the current airline is saying that they will not be able to keep flying into the airport. And I think that's something we need to really consider a lot more seriously, and also, which leads me to my next point, be discussing in a lot more depth with government. Because, quite frankly, we know this, that nothing is going to happen with this project unless government comes to the party. And I would hope that over the next, as part of this process, that would be speaking really in depth with both major parties in government. And also, which leads me to my next point. Oh, look at that, eh? Just as soon as I start talking about the future, the lights come back on. Is realising that we are in local government is in a process of change at the moment. We've got the review of local government going on, the future of local government. I think it's quite likely that in the future there'll be a lot more of a regional, be much more part of a regional body, and Whangarei will be the capital city of Northland. And I think in that case we really seriously need to be speaking to other councils and taking a Northland regional lens on what infrastructure is needed and what type of airport is needed, if any, for the future of the region. I'm also aware, I think somebody referred to it at the last meeting about it as an NZTA working group on regional air transport. Again, I think all of those factors are something that we haven't really talked about and considered in this. We've looked at some locations, but now I think is the time to start having those sort of conversations so that we get in perspective whether what we are looking at is going to work for the future. So, yeah, I mean, I'm really happy with the way the recommendations step this through. I'm comfortable with the fact that we have to future-proof, but I think we're a long way from making a decision about a new airport at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Cutforth. Councillor Peters, sorry, I beg your pardon.
I thought it was in Coventry. I want to pick up on a comment that was made in feedback, not particularly for the site, but my hope is when we are doing this investigation, and if we take one of these sites like Ruatangata, the preferred site, that it's an opportunity to upgrade the public transport system, that we actually start to invest in a rural transport system that is, so it's basically an open mode, and that was my real interest. And this also, and I'm not sure how close it is to the rail line, but this may be also something to look at our community, the way in which we move around in Northland. So that's a core part of actually looking at a different site than Whangarei, which is more difficult. Thank you.
Councillor Peters. Councillor Martin.
Yes, well, it has been a pleasure to chair this study, which is what it basically was. We've got documentation, to say it's rushed, from Becker's report, 15th of November 2013, with the long list. In the long list, sites were evaluated against the broad criteria relating to the operational suitability, planning requirements and consenting, engineering feasibility, and land transportation links. The sites were evaluated against a long list of things. So there's been exhaustive work done, and while some people might want to fly a kite, it's not a kite airport, it's going to be an aeroplane airport. And I was really happy that we were tasked with finding an alternative site to ensure that we had a consented site if and when we had to move from Whangarei. That's what the criteria was about 10 years ago when I started chairing this. We've had enormous number of meetings. We've had MPs at the meetings, we've had all the interested people. The Muri Whenua group we met before we met with councillors. So we've been going through the process very thoroughly. We've had Becker have been involved, and they've done exhaustive studies about all of the things that were required. And the fact that we started off with airport locations from Puipui to Waipu, and we visited them and looked at them, and the staff did the evaluations on them and came down to one preferred site, is actually quite an achievement in that with all of the studies that's been done. And all we're doing is getting a site ready, so if we have to move from Whangarei, then we have somewhere to go. And all the talk about what's the price and how much is it going to cost, we haven't decided to go there. We all know that there's massive increases now. If we got to put a price down and said this is how much it's going to cost, it would only be a very bad guess. So the reality is we need to get the site and then we need to go through the full process. We don't even know where the alignment of the strip is going to be. There's several different alignments that can go there. So there's a lot of things that are yet to be done and we don't even know whether it's suitable. But this allows them to go onto the site and do all of the studies, test for the fog that keeps coming up, test for all of the things that need to be done, ground conditions and all the others. But the aeronautical suitability of that site, of all of those 3 sites, they've done enormous tests, and there's been experts from all over the show doing that. And councillors have been updated on a very, very regular basis. And so I think that where this is going and the safeguards that have been put in here are just ideal. Just the recommendation pretty much explains where we are and what we're going. So it's I'm really happy to support this, and I think it's been a good process. So thank you very much to Councillor Deeming for being on that committee all the time, Councillor Innes and Councillor Reid for the last 3 years. So and Councillor Herman before that. But Councillor Hulse had to withdraw because of our conflict down south. So, but everybody has made a good contribution, and thank you very much. So it's good. Oh, and the staff, we're enormous amount of work in Fraser.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. I've got Councillor Cooper, then Councillor.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I think it is worth taking up today as a chance to acknowledge those people who have worked on the study for so long. We've heard a little bit about that, and we, as we look around, can perhaps see the toll it's taken on some of those older councillors. However, well, we should acknowledge the work, and thank you very much for that. I guess from my perspective, as a first-time councillor, I've been on here for 3 years. Bold decisions, as has been mentioned, and brave decisions do have to be made. The recommendations that we have here in the agenda lay out clearly a path forward, as you said, Your Worship, as you introduce this item, and I don't disagree with them. Yes, there are questions that are still to be asked, and yes, there will be angst from the public as we go forward. However, it is quite clear that we cannot answer those questions and without further investigation, and so it is good to have a map that will take us through that process. I'd like to pick up the point that Councillor Innes made about the fact that an airport is often an economic hub, and we do have a chance, as we look to the future of this district, to create not only an economic hub, but we also must recognise that an airport is an enabler of business for the wider district as well. It has to be reliable, and it has to be functional, and it has to be well connected. So as we go through this process, those are the things that we should be looking forward to as a council. We should be ensuring that that is the case, and I am, this is one step in that process, and as we've said, Your Worship, we are not making a decision to build a airport there. What we are doing is committing to look further and in more depth. So thank you.
Councillor Cooper. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you. Your Worship, a question. If I propose an amendment and I fail to get a seconder, am I still able to speak on the original motion?
Yes.
Okay, good. I would like to propose an amendment, and I can't see this going very far, that we select option 4 to continue to operate from Whangarei, to retain Whangarei Airport at Whangarei, and work with the CAA to retain dispensations to operate, accepting if these dispensations end, some commercial and emergency services may not be able to fly in and out of the airport at Whangarei.
So a seconder for the amendment. Councillor Golightly, seconded. Councillor Golightly asked questions.
Yes, I have asked questions.
Councillor Murphy.
Thank you. Well, I find that this process has been ongoing, and as Councillor Cutforth said, it is the hardest decision that we are faced with probably in my 2 terms on council, because it would be the largest infrastructure development. And I know that, as other councillors have said, this decision today isn't necessarily seeing that that development will occur, but I think I have to stay true to my principles, and exactly, Councillor Innes described that this would not just be an airport, it's actually an economic base, and so the reality of that is that, exactly that, it would not just be an airport. Picture any other large industrial or infrastructure development like Auckland Airport, and we know the associated activities that you would see adjunct with it. Starbucks, Subways, McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, petrol stations, but other big box retail, commercial lockups. That is the reality. And when I think of Ruatangata, there is no way I can condone that kind of development happening in a beautiful rural area. Some people might think that I'm being foolish and that I'm not thinking about future-proofing our district, but actually I think I'm doing just the opposite, because in this day and age we cannot keep making decisions like we live in the 1960s. That spade on that desk to me represents the type of thinking that, you know, people were looking at in the 60s. Let's build roads, airports and landfills. We are in a different time, everybody, and I implore you, if this money, if we were talking about spending hundreds of millions of dollars on light rail to Auckland, imagine being able to jump on a hyper-fast train like they have in Japan and being able to get from Whangarei to Auckland Airport in less than an hour. You're at an international airport, you can fly wherever the heck you want. You can fly around New Zealand, you can fly overseas. Is this the time to be investigating, and I know that's what this decision is today, to be investigating, you know, another step towards spending hundreds of millions of dollars building a piece of infrastructure in Ruatangata? Is it really needed? New Zealand, we've got a plethora of airports. And sure, some will say a new airport, you know, is integral for our economic growth and development. I don't know about that. I believe, you know, often at council I have seen in the last 6 years we do get steered down certain roads, and you know, you have to go back, well actually I think there are lots of airports in New Zealand that will continue to operate with dispensations, and the future is unknown. You know, we're likely to see smaller planes, not larger ones, and you know, if in 10 or 20 years we're unable to fly from Whangarei, which I doubt, you know, then perhaps there will be an option to catch a train to the Auckland Airport. So yeah, the environmental cost for me is too high. So thank you for seconding my amendment today, Councillor Golightly, because at least I got to have my say, so I really, really appreciate that. I'm just having a look. Yeah, the only other thing I wrote is that just with the impacts of climate change and our consumption of fossil fuels, even just the embedded carbon in the construction of an airport like this, in my opinion, is too high. And yeah, I would like to finish by saying we just carry on making decisions that are just another nail in our coffin. Are we a bunch of frogs sitting in a pot, starting to boil? When are we going to jump out? Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop. Just to pick up on Councillor Murphy's rhetoric there, I'll be true to my principles, and looking forward, I think we just have to look at Whangarei. When that spade was turned a turf in Whangarei, and we look at the future of Whangarei, back in the 60s, Whangarei was regarded as a boom-bust city and the refinery was very much part of that. Having chaired planning and development for 2 terms and also being deputy mayor this term, I really see that we have sustained growth in Whangarei. Whangarei is on a path, really, a path to the future. It's a path that we are very much part of the growth of Auckland. And when we look at the wider growth of Auckland and Hamilton and Tauranga, I really see that we have to make some long-term decisions. They're hard, but that's our job. We're elected to do that. We're required to do that under the legislation. And I'm really mindful that it's not just us making that decision. The decision is made by other stakeholders. Air New Zealand is a key stakeholder. All right, it's a monopoly, but that's our airport, it's our airline, and it's safeguarded us both internationally and nationally in terms of providing a service. And also government funding. Government is very much part of this. I think if we sit here and we think that we're making a decision on an airport and we are the key organisation and making that decision, I think we sort of have a false hope there, because Air New Zealand and the government are very much part of this. Councillor Murphy, I think in terms of looking forward, yes, there will be innovation. We've got 30 years, maybe 20, 30 years before a decision really has to be made. But let's put the best foot forward and start moving in a direction that gives confidence to the future of Whangarei, investment in Whangarei, and looking at business development. So I will not be supporting the amendment, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. This council has a long history of future-proofing, looking forward. Look at the Wilson's Dam, look at the Whale Valley Dam, future-proofing water for our people. Same with rubbish collections, landfills. We've looked forward to provide the infrastructure that our community has asked for, that it needs, and that it will continue to need. We are not suddenly going to be a community that doesn't have waste, that doesn't need water, that doesn't want to fly nationally, internationally. If we have these wonderful fast trains all of a sudden to wherever, that's going to cost at least as much as an airport would. And it's going to take up far more land than an airport in one area is likely to do. It's going to need to actually be from place to place where people can get on it, get off it, travel easily. We're not a city with a little area where we can have little fast trains. We're a district. We've got people in all sorts of remote areas. Transporting those people to the airport is a major consideration. I'm proud to have been part of this committee. I'm proud of the leadership that we've had on this committee. Simon, as our infrastructure manager at the time, and now our chief executive, and Greg, Councillor Martin, having led this for so many years. Talk about dedication, travelling to all of these different areas that have been investigated. Civil aviation is a paramount factor in what we have to consider. We can't decide we are forever and ever and ever going to stay at Whangarei, and we are never ever ever going to need air transport if Whangarei fails. We have, as a responsible council, we have to future-proof the ability to have air travel from our district. I cannot understand why we would even consider to not be future-proofing the infrastructure that we require. In fact, while I do understand the concerns of the people living in the area where we're currently is our preferred area. The opportunities there for both passive and sporting type recreation are phenomenal. There are fantastic opportunities for protecting the environmentally significant areas, for providing sports fields in an area where there isn't any currently, for, as Councillor Innes and Councillor Cooper have said, developing future infrastructure for commercial activity. Council does have the ability to decide what can go there, if Council owns that land, if we have to move from Whangarei, which maybe we won't. Maybe there will be technology advances in the future that say we don't need to, in which case we will have a fantastic opportunity for passive and sporting recreation out there.
Thank you, Councillor Denham. Councillor Whangarei.
Yes, the energy. I just have another question in relation to the original motion. And the question is just for clarification so that those who are watching understand the actual time differences in here. So the question is, it's about the designation. The work that's going to be that is planned on the original motion is going to take a time period. Do we have an estimate of how long that time period may be? Estimate.
That additional work is probably going to take 12 to 24 months.
Okay, so if we say 2 years, and then from that, then there's a designation. A designation has a time period of...
That could take another 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. So we're looking at a minimum, just for clarification, we're looking at a minimum of at least 4 years before, and while that designation process is in place, that does not mean commitment of building an airport, does it?
No, it does not.
And within that whole time period, there is also submission processes for the public on those aspects.
There's an RMA process to go through, yes.
Yeah. Which can also extend the time period.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Madam Chair. I'm just trying to get clarification because these are questions that people are asking, and they're asking what differences and what time frames things are taking, so that they have a realistic understanding over what direction, if council goes down the path of the original motion, what time frames they'll be actually expecting to get involved in. Thank you.
Councillor Golightly, I think you I've got all these notes here, so I'm going to try as best I can to put them sort of all together in a sort of timely manner. This is a tricky one for me, and I seconded Councillor Murphy's motion because even though I agree with what she said in principle, I've sort of got a different sort of stance on it. And Councillor Innes, made the comment that we're elected to make the decisions, but we're also, as Councillor Murphy said, we're also elected to make the decisions on our principles. I understand that this has been going on since 2014, and it has been a long time. And we're also saying it's actually not rushed. For me and my decision making, and I'm going to stand true to my principles now, I feel like I'm being rushed. I sort of felt like we were being rushed when this land came up, and it was just sort of all of a sudden it was just go, go, go. So for me, I know we have to future-proof, and to me, I feel like we almost have, in the sense that we now have this land. When we had the workshop with Becca, I'm not sure who asked the man that was doing the workshop. It was a councillor, but someone asked what they would do with the information that they had and talking to us. And I remember him saying that if we were to not carry on, he would be comfortable because we've already secured some land. So in a sense, he felt, well, this is how I took it, he felt that we had already future-proofed.
Yeah.
So so I am uncomfortable, and whilst I'm not going to abstain my vote, because I don't actually believe in abstaining, I think I've only done that once, I feel like I'm rushed. We have no real idea on the further costs of what these technical investigations and everything are going to cost. Yes, we may have something in our long-term plan, but we still don't. It just sort of seems too speculative. We don't know if we're going to need an airport. So I'm sort of really torn. So that's my opinion. And I'm just going to ask, I don't know the process on standing orders, how we do this, but with the recommendations, like I feel really uncomfortable because I agree with 1, 2 and 3. I really do. That's not what's in question here at all. But then I'm torn on the rest of it. So how do I make a decision and vote on something that I believe is just part of it? I sort of agree with part of it, I don't agree with the rest of it. So can we take it in parts?
You can request that the motion is parts, and I would be amenable to that.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed listening to sort of most of us, and I agree. I'm not against future-proofing anything. It just, for me, I just sort of feel like I feel a bit rushed, and as Councillor Coccarello, I think it might have been Councillor Benny, you know, people out there are saying, what is the hurry? And I just sort of have to agree. So thank you. That's my thank you.
Councillor Martin.
Yeah, just speaking to the amendment, to say it's rushed, we have been having these meetings ever since most of the people who are finding that they haven't had information. There's a pile that high. The point is, we will always need an airport. The people that fly into Whangarei or into Whangarei are friends and family coming for funerals or businessmen or various family things. They haven't got time to drive to an airport somewhere or a train station. Come when the train wants to come once every day or two. They need to get to places quickly. We're in a modern world now. That's the reality. Hopefully we're going to have hydrogen planes soon because they seem to have more growth than the electric ones, but the sooner the better. And that's something we need to look forward to. Going back to the Stone Age is never going to fix it. The people from Whangarei used to travel by walker to Auckland. They had them with just 1 or 2 people. People need to get from A to B, no matter what form of transport. In the day they had horses or whatever they used, or had to walk. But in the modern age, people need to do business. They need to get to their family. They need to get to various things, and they need to be able to do it quickly. If you look at our senior staff here, the wages that if they were going to a meeting in Auckland, it was critical. They'd spend a day getting there, a day at the meeting, and a day getting back. Because that's just how the frequency of the trains were when I was young, when they had a rail car and everything. So the reality is, air travel and fast travel is always going to be critical. And it'll get cheaper and cheaper. I don't believe they'll get smaller planes so much, simply because the fixed cost is still there. The landing fees, the staff, the pilots, and all of the people that need to be involved in it. Same in a smaller plane as a big plane. So, but the real fact is, to say that we're rushed and we could have a piece of land and then start the consenting process when Whangarei has said it has to close, shows naivety, really, because it's taken all of this time to get to this stage and we still haven't even gone for the resource consent. The whole process could take 10 to 15 years from the time it starts until the time it finishes. So if we don't carry on with this process, we're going to be out of kilter altogether. We just need to keep the process going. All of the issues that have been raised about the environmental issues and everything, all of that will have to be addressed in the resource consent and the consenting process, wherever the airport is. So I won't be supporting the amendment. So thank you.
Councillor Martin, I've got Councillor Peters and Councillor Reid.
I think Councillor Murphy's points are well made. There are many downsides in developing another industrial area in a pristine rural and ecological area. nevertheless, I believe we need to move ahead with this decision to give us the ability to investigate options. However, I hope in this investigation that we take Councillor Murphy's perspective into account the importance of maintaining pristine rural and ecological areas and the changes to the air transport and transport generally, which may make this only a safeguard that we're doing rather than actuality.
Thank you, Councillor Peters. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to move a procedural motion that we take the vote on this, please. There has been a procedural motion that the amendment be put. Do I have a seconder for that motion?
I'll second it.
I'll put that motion. This is for the amendment to be put. Those in favour, aye.
Aye.
Those against? No. What?
No.
The motion is lost. So, Councillor Benson.
So
Just to be clear, everybody, the motion that the amendment be put was lost, not the amendment.
Hannah's motion.
yes, cool. So speaking on the amendment, the difficulty.
Me too, and I'm like, what?
Councillor Benning, thank you.
Right. The difficulty with Councillor Murphy's amendment is that this was put as one of our options that for public submission that people voted on, where half our population voted for that option, and to ignore that is, and I know in previous debates regarding submissions made by the public, there's been considerable discussion about how we should be supporting what the public want, and it goes back to my point I made earlier that it should not have been an option in my mind. I would love to support Councillor Murphy's amendment. I think it's the but I can't, because I do take my duty seriously as I just make a comment about the fast trains, and to suggest that Stone Age, going back to Stone Age, is I think a little bit misleading. Anybody that's been on a fast train in Europe will understand that it is the way of the future in a lot of countries. Whether we could do that here would be a great asset to our region, I believe. But I cannot support Councillor Murphy's amendment as much as I want to, because I believe that it is my duty to take this a step further and to look at this and to go back to the original amendment. So,
Councillor Cooper.
Speaking to the amendment, and I'd like to pick up on some points that Councillor Peters made, and that is that Councillor Murphy's points are well made, and the sentiment behind them I applaud. However, the fact that we look at things always as a negative when it comes to this sort of thing, while I can understand in the past the environment has suffered and we need to make amends, there is also opportunities in these developments to do it well, to do it right, to do it in a way that actually reduces emissions and provides an example on how we can go ahead and grow the district, and at the same time look after the environment. So I won't be supporting the amendment.
Councillors, I would like to speak to the amendment. I went as councillor, and this is the part of debate that makes decision making really rich and diverse. And I thank you for the input that you have had. And like others, I think I was sitting here thinking, she's got very good points. And I also took on the thinking around option 4, which was the preferred option for the community. To add on, I'll reiterate the amendment. It is to retain Whangarei Airport at Whangarei and work with the CAA to retain dispensations to operate, excepting if these dispensations end, some commercial and emergency services may not be able to fly in and out of the airport at Whangarei. The undercurrent for that is if the dispensations end, something tragic has happened at Whangarei. That's the reason why we would no longer be able to fly in and out of the airport at Whangarei, because something awful happened. None of us want that. If something awful had happened and we went to the CAA and said, would you mind if we take 20 years to be able to find a location for another airport, can we operate out of that? I know what their answer would be. Yeah. If we went to them and said, we foreshadow that this was a remote, and please let it not happen, possibility that we could no longer fly in and out of Whangarei, but we have an alternate site, and we've got a notice of requirement, we've got the designation, we can begin the construction of that airport, and would you give us that dispensation to operate out of Whangarei for that period of time? I think their answer is more likely to be yes. We are, the Whangarei District has half the population of the Northland region. We know the economic benefit of the airport to us, both for domestic, so friends and family, and the business aspect of the people who are flying in and out of that airport. That's what needs to continue. So while my heart hopes that we never have to move from Whangarei, it seriously does. I hope that the technology for craft that can fly in and out will no longer require that long runway, and it will meet the purpose. That would be great. And also, just thinking about the spectre of commercial development, if airports were attracting commercial development such as was described, then why are they not at Whangarei? Our airport is a different scale to the international airport in Auckland, and we meet the needs of our community. It may be that if we continue to stay there, we've got another operator who's just moved there and moving their operations, so it is the hub, and yeah, that's why I won't be supporting the amendment. Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak to the amendment? I will put the amendment. Those in favour, aye. Aye. Those against? No. Okay. The amendment is lost. I will now take my right of reply on the original motion. There were a number of points, and actually initially when Councillor Benham was speaking, I was going to refer back to the option 4 on page 129, but Councillor Murphy generously used that as an amendment, because the point was the option for staying in Whangarei was an option we needed to present to our community in the consultation process. And people who would have preferred that, it was interesting, the heat map of where everybody was that wanted to stay there and wanted to leave. We've spoken of the costs of the future investigation, the long-term cost if we do have to start commencing the construction of an airport, and we know they are significant, but that's not the decision we're making today. I also heard in the debate around integrated transport solutions, and I totally support that. If we're looking at air, sea, the rail and roads, those solutions need to be the future focus that we have, and that's where those decisions will be made for the benefit of all of our people. And I also just loved the comment that whatever dollar we put on it will be a very bad guess, because that's what we do when we put budgets. That is the right of reply. I will now, as requested by Councillor Golightly, I will be putting the motion in parts, but I am going to join together items 1 to 3 and then 4 through to 12.
Can I ask a question, please?
Councillor Martin.
We moved, the whole motion was moved and was seconded, and we've all spoken on it according to that. The meeting hasn't been asked if they wanted to take it in parts, and each part is important for the other part. It's the way it's written. I believe it should be put in its entirety so that we can vote on the whole issue, because that's what we've been debating for the last hour and a quarter, and I believe that's the correct process.
Councillor Martin, I appreciate your perspective, but I was asked by an elected member for the item to be taken to parts, and standing orders give me that ability as chair to respect that, and I have done that. So I'll move items 1 to 3. Those in favour, actually I'll call for a division. Those in favour, please raise your hands.
Councillors Golightly, Cutforth, Demon, Cockerillo, Benny, Cooper, Martin, Reid, Peters, Connor, Innes, and Her Worship the Mayor.
Just noting that Councillor Hulse is abstaining. Are those against?
Just me.
Councillor Murphy.
Councillor Murphy.
And now items 4 through to 12. Those in favour, please raise your hands.
Can we call them as a division as well?
Yes, please. Sorry, that's Councillors Deeming, Cockerillo,
Benny, Cooper, Martin, Reid, Peters, Connor, Innes, and Her Worship the Mayor.
those against.
Councillors Golightly, Cutforth, and Murphy.
And abstaining, Councillor Hulse. That's passed. Carried. Councillors, thank you everybody for your debate on this topic. That is the only item on our agenda. I will pass back to Councillor Benny to close our meeting with Karakia.
Tahi ati, e ara e te kato nei, tuia e ranga, tuia e raro, tuia e nākau tangata, he rongo mau, Maori tū, Maori oho, Maori tau, tihei Maori ora. Sweep clear the path before us, unite above, unite below, unite and bind the hearts of all to a commitment of unity, the standing life force, the alert life force, the balanced life force. Sneeze the breath of life. That is the Whangarei District Council, Karakia.
Thank you everybody, and thank you to our support crew who've been here today. Fraser, particularly to you, thank you.